Okay, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Now, completing the square is different than factoring, but it is a skill you need to know for future references. If you do not understand completing the square will show up so many times this year. So let's get started on completing the square. All right, this is from the book. To complete the square for any quadratic expression for x squared plus bx, please follow the steps below. What you're doing is you're taking the b and you're going to divide it by 2, and then you're going to square that whole number. That's what you're going to do. Divide by 2 and square. So every time I say completing with square, you need to go divide by 2 and square. So let's just try some problems. This is exactly how the book if it helps. Now, this problem is exactly the same problem we did with factoring. So you can kind of see that the problems can be done different ways. All right, completing the square first. What you need to do is take the 12 and move it to the other side. So minus 12 on both sides. So you're going to go x squared plus 8x plus a blank equals negative 12 plus a blank. Okay? Now what you're going to do is figure out what goes in that blank. Well, that's the divide by 2 and square. So you take this number and we're going to divide it by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and we square it, which is 16. So 16 goes in the blank, and 16 goes in the blank. Okay? So now what we do is we factor this as a trinomial, a perfect square trinomial. So this would become x minus 4 squared, because the square root of 16 is 4, x squared is x, and the whole point of completing the square is to make it a perfect square, equals negative 12 plus 16, which is 4. To get rid of a square, we take the square root. Okay, so x minus 4 equals, now this was a mistake that you guys had in your homework. Please remember, if you're taking the square root of a number, it's plus or minus that number. So square root of 4 is 2. And then we're going to add 4 to both sides. So x equals 4 plus or minus 2. And so 4 plus 2 is 6. 4 minus 2 is negative 2. And when we did it a minute ago in factoring, we got 6 and negative 2 also. And again, if you were to graph it, where would it cross the x-axis? It crosses the x-axis at 6 and negative 2. Okay, let's try that again. All right, completing the square. Take the c and move it to the other side. X squared plus 4x plus a blank equals 10 plus a blank. Now what goes in the blank? Take the b, divided by 2, and square. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, then square. 2 squared is 4. Okay. Now we made a perfect square trinomial, so factor it. This would just be x plus 2 squared equals 14. The square root of 4 is 2, square root of x squared is x. Now you only can do that with perfect square trinomials. That's it. Take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 2 equals, now square root of 14 is not a perfect square, so it's plus or minus square root of 14. Can't simplify it, there's no perfect squares in it. And the last thing is get x by itself, minus 2, minus 2. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 14. And then there's your answers. Now, just be aware, if you get like square roots and stuff like that, those are the problems you cannot factor. You only can do quadratic formula and completing the square. You can do the graph on the calculator, but this is a perfect answer, and the graph on the calculator is going to give you a decimal. So let's go even harder. Okay. Now, on completing the square, what would happen if there is a number in front of the x squared? The a has a value greater than 1. Well, there's an extra step to it, and it can get a little complicated if you mess up on your numbers. This is where your arithmetic has to be solid. So the first thing is first. You got to divide everything by whatever number it is. So x squared plus 6x minus 5 over 4 equals 0. And now it's done exactly like the last problem. So again, you have to be solid in your arithmetic because you are going to get fractions. So we're going to move this over. X squared plus 6x plus a blank equals 5 over 4 plus a blank. All right, so what goes in the blank? So take the b divided by 2 and square. So divide by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So perfect square trinomial now. So it's x plus 3 squared equals, now 5 over 4 plus 9, do common denominators, do the calculator, do whatever you need to do, but it is 41 over 4. Take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 3 equals, now this is where it's going to get a little weird for you, plus or minus the square root of 41. Now the square root of 4 is a perfect square, so that's just 2. Simple there? So the last thing is, now we just have to get the x by itself. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus square root of 41 over 2. And that is the solution right there. So again, you cannot factor this problem because it has a radical. If you want to graph it, that's fine, but it's going to give you the decimal. But other than that, that is the perfect solution for completing the square. So again, this one is the completing the square worksheet. Please make sure you are solid in this because completing the square is showing up all year. I will say divide by 2 and square 100 times.